Hey, hello, this is your host, Vinyl Man Jeb of Unlikely Places Pop and Rock Radio. Thanks to a friend of mine, Cindy Barry, who saw the Marcus Blake episode and was like, hey, I have some friends as well that would be an interesting guest on your show. She brought Jon Povey to my attention, and I love the pretty things. Jon Povey is here with us now. Hi, Jon.
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you?
I'm very good, and you?
Doing really well. Glad to be interviewing here today. Very excited to. I was like getting all excitement about it. I always get excited with the guests coming on the show, especially ones that I've listened to for most of my childhood, which was the pretty things. Very excited.
You were looking over the cot with your headphones on, were you?
Oh yeah. You were also in Star Sponge Vision, correct? Right?
That's right. Yeah, Twink and I did an album a couple of years ago.
Very cool.
Yeah, with about Aleister Crowley. I don't know if you know him, but
Name rings a bell.
we
Sounds very familiar.
yeah, he was a bad guy and sort of influenced a lot of guys like Jimmy Page and the guys out of Deep Purple, all sorts of bands, heavy metal bands got into him, and his kind of poetry was quite interesting. I didn't know much about him, but Twink said to me, I was doing an album for Twink. I think it
Oh
was
wow.
Twink Pink 97 or something. I don't know. Twink's done a lot of albums. And he said, have you heard of Aleister Crowley? So I said, well, sort of. Because he had a picture and he's on the Sergeant Pepper's cover, Aleister Crowley, with all the rest of the Rascals. So
Oh,
he
okay.
said to me, what do you think? So I said, well, I'll get a couple of books and have a read and see if I can come up with something. And so I wrote a song called Crowley and Me, funny enough. I sent it to Twink and he went, oh, wow, man, that's great. Can you do some more? So I started listening to Aleister Crowley's poetry, which is all about sort of, a lot of people expect it to be heavy, dark, lots of upside down crosses and witches flying about all over the place. But it's not like that at all, really. I mean, once I started to read about it and get into it a bit, because I've been sort of doing meditation for 37 years, believe it or not, even though I was into pretty things, I was still meditating early in
Oh,
the mornings. They used to throw stones at my hotel window to get me up, so I knock, try and knock the
very
door
cool.
down. Yeah, but and the more I read about Crowley, the more I kind of realised that he was a kind of terminal meditator. He was a meditator junkie, really. He couldn't stop meditating, and it's very interesting actually. Once you sort of see through the kind of razzmatazz that he undoubtedly put in front of himself to get publicity, I think. I'm not going to be very popular with people who are Aleister Crowley fans who think that he was the Dark Lord and he
Hmm.
would summon the bad guy every 5 minutes and dance around naked in the street and all that sort of stuff. I don't think really he did much of that. I think he used it to sell books and he used the media. I mean, he was very good at it. So there
That's
we
a
are.
skill
So I
right
wrote
there.
a whole album about that. A lot of it was about his poetry, so I just wrote music to his words.
Ooh.
And I liked it. It was good fun to do. It was good to work with Twink again. We haven't worked for since 19 blah, 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 blah. So it was good fun.
Now you were in the pretty things since the beginning, correct or no?
No, I was in the
Okay.
Pretty Thing from 1966.
Oh, okay.
What happened was that I was in another. A lot of us in those days. How old are you, Jeremy?
I'm 22.
My God, Father,
Uh,
how dare you talk to me? You've got to be at least 79. But in those days, there was a lot. Everybody was in a band. Everybody. We came from like in England anyway. We called them council estates, and they were just sort of low-paid workers' places where a lot of kids would grow up and play together, and there was no aggravation. We didn't know very much because there was no media, there was no computers, there was really no TV when we first started. So it was like that. So the only fun you could have really once you wanted to hear some music outside of jazz or traditional jazz in those days, you wanted to hear a bit of blues, you had to play it.
oh
So,
wow.
we all sort, sucked up to our parents and said, please, Dad, please sign these forms so I can buy this guitar or whatever. So that's how it all started. So a lot of bands were doing that. So on every street corner where I lived, there were a lot of bands, including the Pretty Things, who were just down the road. And we were lucky enough to go to Germany. We went to the Star Club in the Notoriety days, where we played with Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Searchers,
Very cool.
the Big Three, all those Liverpool bands, Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers from the UK. And so we kind of learnt. The band I was in was a so-and-so and the so-and-sos, which in those days was called Burnt Elliott and the Fenmen. And Burnt Elliott and the Fenmen managed to come back from Germany and recorded a favourite Liverpool band song called Money, which was written by a couple of American guys. The Beatles had recorded it. We decided to record it, and it came out on Decca and went straight in the charts. So we were in a band, and we were on tour with the Stones on the Gaumont Cinema tour with about 67 other bands in those days. Played 10 minutes and Screaming Kids, and then on to the next gig. The Pretty Things were longer haired than us. They were more radical than us, and they came out with maraca shaking, Phil looking really cool and getting on the floor, and the drummer coming out and smashing and all that sort of stuff. So it was very popular. So the Pretty Things were more popular than us. It went to a point where Burnt Elliott left our band, so the Fem band went on their own. It was a four-piece, singing a lot of harmony stuff, and we toured a lot of the university circuit in those days. It was a very, very good, lucrative circuit for bands, playing the universities, which were, you played to a couple of thousand people in the campus, and it was very cool. We used to play 3 or 4 nights a week, and in those days we were earning 100 quid each, 100 quid the band, and in those days that was a lot of money. When you think my dad was earning about 20 quid a month or something, it was a fortune. So we were very happy. We were doing okay. And then we got to the point where it wasn't really going anywhere. And Wally, who was in the band with me, who lived opposite Phil in the same street, Phil came across to him one day and said, "Look, well, I'd like you to join the Pretty Things with John." And it was all from Phil. Phil was the instigator of all this. And so Wally said to me quietly, out of earshot of the other two in the band, he said, "What about John the Pretty Things?" So I said, "When do we start? Let's go."
No questions asked there. When do we go?
No, I was a drummer in the Fen Men.
Oh.
I was a keyboard player. I was a classical keyboard player, Royal Schools of Music and all that. And then I went on to drums for the Fen Men, Bernie and the Fen Men. And then I went back to keyboard for the Pretty Things. So we started together, and our hair was pretty short, so that had to be grown pretty quick. So, and all that. So, and then we found that we had a common ground. Dick got on very well with Dick, and Phil, Wally, and I, and Skip, the drummer at the time. He wasn't too keen on us because we had short hair, and he wasn't quite. But I have to say, in later years, Skip and I became very close. So it was only a temporary sort of thing, really. And that's how it started, really. And that started with me. The Pretty Things had some big hits. They were very outrageous. They made the Stones look like choir boys because they had much more radical moves on. It was very competition for the Stones and the Pretty Things, under a lot of competition. But anyway, the Pretty Things had gone through a bit of a lull because a lot of black kind of bands were coming out, and the kind of R&B shaking maraca thing had kind of died off in the UK. So Phil had decided, well, he wanted to go a different way. He was kind of done it to death with the maracas. So he wanted to get a bit more music. We had more music because of our classical background, all the rest of it. And, we knew more chords. We had more ideas. And so that's how it started. So I joined in '66 to sing some harmonies on an album that was half finished called Emotions, which was okay, but it wasn't great. I mean, it was completely different to anything the Pretty Things had ever done, and whether it was a cool thing to do, I'm not sure. To this day, I'm still not sure. But we kind of, we syruped it up with some very nice harmonies and put some keyboards on it and stuff like that. And that's how we started. So that's very how cool. Phil and Wally and Dick got together with Skip.
That's predecessor to SF Sorrow.
We did a couple of things before that. I mean, in those days, we
Yeah.
used to read a lot. In those days, we were great book readers.
Mm.
And I remember Phil was reading a book called The Alexandria Quartet, which is written by Lawrence Durrell.
Hmm.
And we kind of started to get into the characters in that book, very strong characters. So that kind of bled through to Defecting Grey, Single, and all those kind of things that we were doing, very experimental. We were obviously, taking some illegal substances at that time.
LSD, probably, of
Uh,
course. There's a song there.
we were tripping, yeah, we were tripping a bit here and there.
Yeah.
And of course, but in those days, you have to remember that there wasn't anything else. I mean, there wasn't
Yeah.
any media. There wasn't anything to kind of learn from. You had to learn your own way. You were your own judge, jury, and at school in your own class. That's
Mm.
where you were. So everything you did as a band, you were the only people with your producer who could judge that. There wasn't anywhere else really.
Yeah.
That time it was all very new grounds.
When SF Sorrow started, what was the
Yeah.
inspiration behind that to start that album, and was it as successful as it is now when people look back and call it the most? I mean, I found out about SF Sorrow being that this is the psych album that you need to know, but back then I was reading that you guys, it wasn't as big of a success as it is now. So I was
It
wondering
wasn't.
how.
Saying that about not having media and all that sort of stuff. I
Mm.
mean, we signed up to EMI, and the first thing we did with EMI was this single called Defecting Grey, which we'd done in a small studio in Soho in London, and that was 8.5 minutes long. Well, nobody ever did a single that was
No.
8.5, 2.5 minutes if you were lucky. So everybody went, where are these guys at? I mean, God, what are they doing? So anyway, part of the deal for signing with EMI is that we reduced that single down to about 5.5 minutes.
Oh.
We met Norman Smith, who did some work with the Beatles up to Rubber Soul. He also produced Pink Floyd later on. So he was a cool guy for us. And so we met him. We liked him a lot. He liked us. We brought that single out, and of course everybody at EMI, because they're all very straight, we're all very long-haired and stoned a fair amount of the time. We're stoned, and of course they didn't recognise that state at all, or where we were at all. So when we came to SF Sorrow, the story came from Phil originally, because we were reading a lot in those days. I mean, a lot of people, there was nothing to watch. TV was crap, really. There was the odd black and white music show like Oh Boy, Jack Good's Oh Boy, and those kind of shows were pretty good, but that was one in a blue moon. So you were reading a lot. So Phil came up with this idea of characters, this character called SF Sorrow, and then Wally said, well, why don't we kind of expand the characters, and then Dick said, well, what about Baron? I've been reading about Baron Saturday. He's a real person,
Oh.
reading about Baron Saturday in Africa. I think it was in Africa or Caribbean or something like that. He was a bit of a witch doctor guy. And these kind of characters, and what we found was that it was so much easier to write a song about a character, because you could visualize the character, or you had a picture of, say, Baron Saturday with a bone through his nose and big gold earrings or something, and you could almost look at his picture and then something will come out. So we did that, and then Wally came out with this really good riff for that song, and of course we're away. And then as time went on, we gradually filled in, the little bits and pieces that we had to do, and then we took it to Norman, who then, on the strength of that, booked us into Abbey Road to record it. And his part of it, I mean, he was like the sixth guy in the band, a pretty sixth member really, because he came from a jazz background. He was older than us, 10, 15 years older than us, but he had such a good knowledge of music. So even though we had, in our way, good knowledge of our music, he could add to that. And it was a wonderful marriage of music, because he would sit on the keyboard. He was a great keyboard player, great mellotron player, and he would come up with a little figure or something like that. We did a single like Talking About the Good Times, which is another single like Defecting Grey, another sort
Mhm.
of psychedelic. And if you listen to that, there's a great riff goes da 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 da. And he came up with that figure. It's
Oh
because
wow.
it just glues the whole single together. And even in those days when sort of 6 minute singles or 5, 6 minute singles weren't selling, it was enough to get you kind of in the kind of alternative music scene where John Peel, radio DJs who were slightly off the wall like John Peel would give it a play. So we were already beginning to build that kind of difference from the very hairy maraca shaking R&B pretty things into more of a musical rock operatic band, something which was new, very new. But your answer to your question,
Mhm.
about 20 minutes ago. I'm
No
sorry it's taking
worries.
so
No
long.
worries. I love this. This is the best part of our podcast. I love when this happens.
And what what happened there was, of course, the EMI suits the guy who were going out there, because in those days you had to be a salesman. So
Mm.
you'd be a salesman for EMI and you'd go to all the record shops, because in those days it was all record shops. If you wanted to hear a record, you had to go to the record shop,
Yeah.
stand in a booth with the earphones, put it on, and if you liked it, you go and buy it. So that's how it worked. So they would go to all these record stores, say, "Oh, I've got this great new album," um, but they didn't really get. I mean, we had a special meeting at EMI where we did the story, we put it into writing, we had foolscap sheets of it, explaining the story, explaining the characters, explaining what it was, and they still didn't get it.
Oh.
So, and then of course, Pete Townsend, who's a smart boy, had bought it, and he bought probably about 6 or 7 copies of it and wore them flat, because his idea for Tommy came
Yeah.
from that.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, later on in life, he said, "Yeah, that's true. Actually, I did nick it." If you listen to Pinball Wizard and you listen to Old Man Going on,
Oh wow. Yeah.
it's the same intro, exactly the same.
Yeah, I'm a big
Yeah,
concept writer myself. As I was telling Wally on some of his posts that he was posting, I really love writing concept writing, and I blame the Who and I blame the Pretty Things for my inspiration for that, which is a good blame, because I just love writing as a character. It's phenomenal.
yeah,
It's a lot of
quite.
fun.
I mean, this whole thing was the Who, because they were more bankable than the Pretty
Mm.
Things. Pretty Things were kind of out there. We were kind of in the Middle Earth, playing at the Middle Earth in Tottenham Court Road with
Mm.
the Pink Floyd, who were not known in those days, exploding rubber chickens and all sorts of stuff like that going on, and the audience sitting down, very hairy audience, loads of hair, just sitting down on the floor, no seats, out of their brains and just sort of rocking away to whatever was coming on. And that's what it was like. We were eclipsed by the Who, because they'd had more single success, because they brought out a lot of 2.5 minute singles, which is great. I love them. I
Mm.
Can't Explain and
Ah,
singles like that. Really cool. Great.
I
Really
also
good
love
singles.
the Who Sellout is a great album with
Yeah.
the just the concept of the radio show, which is really cool.
Yeah. But that kind of, it shot us in the bum, really. I mean, we didn't stand much of a chance. Of course, EMI guys said, "Well, I told you so, I knew it wouldn't sell." And
Hmm.
anyway, so Norman was very disappointed. We were all pretty gutted, although we toured. We'd never played it in its entirety. Although what we did do, we did a show at the Roundhouse. Now the Roundhouse was a gig in North London in Chalk Farm,
Ooh.
and that was where everybody went. The Doors were there, the Byrds were there, or a lot of American bands came over at that time and played there. It opened at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it closed at 11 o'clock at night, and
Nice.
everybody was absolutely out. So we decided to put SSR on the stage in 1968, and we decided to mime. Twink Skip had left the band in that point. He had a wild affair with this French girl or something, and decided to run off to France, as you did in those days. And Twink came in, and so Twink was more theatrical than drum. I mean, he's a good drummer, very good. Not a great solo drummer, but a very good drummer for timekeeping. But he was more theatrical, so we recognised that in him. So he played SSR, and we mimed to the first half of SSR. We had in those days a light show, which was oils in those days. You just had oils on a glass plate, and you moved them around with your fingers,
Oh,
and you had
wow.
this backdrop. And if you look back at some of the old sort of stuff from what's the big gig in San Francisco? Oh, come to me in a minute. Anyway, there's a big gig there which they did a lot of light shows there and everything behind the bands. Jefferson Airplane, all those kind of
Oh,
bands
wow.
came from. And so we had that, and then we had what they called a strobe light. And a strobe light is it just flicks on and off, and it gives the impression when you have a couple of them facing the band away from the audience, it looks as though everything's in slow motion because it's a light that comes
Yeah.
on and off very quickly. It looks like an old sort of a very old sort of black and white movie from the 20s. So Twink, he was SS Sorrow. Phil was doing the narration. Wally was the boy next door. Dick was Baron Saturday. I was
Oh.
Death. I
Oh.
was Death. Yeah, I was a bit white in those days, so they made me Death. So anyway, so there we were. So we mimed it, and then we played the second half. We came back on and we played like our normal gig.
Oh.
Jimi Hendrix was in the audience.
Wow.
Jim from the Doors.
Morrison?
He
Jim
was.
Morrison too?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, wow.
He was there as well. He was in the audience. There was a lot of. It went down very well, but still, it didn't do enough to get it off the ground. It never really took off. I must say, the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years, it's just kept selling the whole time. A lot of people
Yeah.
suddenly kind of realised what a great album it
I
was. It was
got
great
into
fun.
it recently due to like my dad had the first Pretty Things album, and then he had like Savage Eye and Crosstalk, I believe, and we had those in
Also,
the
yeah.
record collection. And then we needed the later it was like we were reading up on stuff, and it was like, oh boy, we missed a ton. So we went back and we got SF Sorrow, and it was like oh. And like my favorite song, She Said Good Morning. She Says Good Morning. And
Yeah.
I actually learned it on acoustic intro, and I'm going to be covering it at a few shows just to play it because
Oh, great.
I love that song, and I love singing it, and it's just one of my favorites. And then I found out about Parachute after finding out about SF Sorrow, and I was just like, okay, yeah, we missed a ton with the Pretty Things. So really
Yeah,
glad
really.
I took that trip back to take the time. And as I like about nowadays, with the music not being as followable for some, I could go back and check out all the older records that I would listen to. And
Yeah.
I'm living my 70s life. You know, my record collection, I have like 2,000 plus original records and stuff, and always on a hunt for more. I'm actually on a hunt for an original SF Sorrow. At some point, I'll get one, a nice EMI
Yeah,
labeled
it'll
one.
come. I'm sure it'll come around. Yeah, because it was
Yeah.
mono. Of course, it was. It was.
Ooh,
It
even
was.
better.
It was mono. You see, when we made it mono because we didn't have
Yeah.
stereo. It was only a 4-track machine. We made that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Oh, it really was awesome. The nice thing about the difference, it might be helpful to your listeners, is that in those days when you took a song into a studio, it wasn't rehearsed in the sense that you knew the song, you had the bones of it, but you didn't rehearse it. So you recorded your rehearsal. You never did that. You always kept it open for ideas.
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah, much
you
different
had
now.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, you
Yeah.
had unlimited time. You see, even though you at that time you didn't realise you were paying for it. You thought, oh, this is great. I don't mind staying in here for 6 months. I love this place. But of course, you pay for it in the end. It came out of your royalties. Of course, you didn't realise that.
Ah.
You could go in there with a, da 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 da, and Norman would come up. How about da 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 da? Oh yeah, okay, da da. We're off. That's how these things evolve. These days, of course, you rehearse it till you can't. You even sleep. You dream about it, have nightmares about it,
Yeah, you go in
and
there
then you
without
go in there
rehearsing,
and record
and
it.
you're screwed
Yeah,
because
it's
you
not.
paid for 4 hours and you only really used 1 hour, and it's like you only had like 1 hour to really work because you're trying to figure it all out if you don't rehearse,
I've,
and it's like, oh
yeah, I
boy.
mean, I've worked with young guys. I mean, I
Mm.
worked with Twink on Crowley. We worked with three very young guys who
Huh.
are great players. Max Gibson, Nick Ferris, and Ed Sykes. I mean, three young guys. I mean, I think Max 22, and he played like Pete Townsend. I mean, he was just a wonderful guitar
Very
player,
cool.
completely natural, doesn't look at what he's doing and all that. And And I said to them, look, we're not going to do it that way. What we're going to do is there's the bare bones of Crowley and me. There's a song. Let's evolve it. And of course it evolved. And that's a nice way of doing it. That's the best way for all the young guys out there who may be listening. Don't go in the studio or in the demo studio, save up your money or whatever, or, rob a bank or whatever you're going to do to get the money, and just go in there with the bare bones and sit down there together. Don't let one guy dominate it all, because it doesn't work. He may be great, he may be a fantastic guitar player or singer. Once you get into that jigsaw situation where you're trying to build a picture with jigsaw pieces, you've got to make sure you've got all the pieces to make the picture. And so you need to get everybody together, get them on the same page and work it through. You can do that in rehearsal, but don't take everything into the studio. Leave some space and it will work out 10 times better than you ever dreamed, I promise you.
Yeah, because some things happen spur of the moment without a doubt. And I noticed
absolutely
that too. Even live too. Sometimes you rehearse, and then if you
absolutely,
it's awesome live. You get these like crazy solos. Or I'm a free verse lyricist myself, so I write a lot, but a lot of times I leave open spaces so I could just talk or sing another verse that's on my mind, because it changes all the time. So
of course,
that was a rhyme right there.
Write it down quickly. You've got in later days, in the later days when we did Silk Torpedo Savage Eye, and we were on the road promoting those, we used to record the gigs, and then we'd play those gigs back to ourselves, either in the hotel or we'd play them in the van or the truck going home or whatever. And you'd be amazed at some of the stuff that would come out that you think, hang on a minute, I could make a song out of that. Do you know what I mean? So it was great to hear yourself on the spot, because when you're playing live, you're on the spot. You can't kind of say to the audience, hang on a minute, I didn't do that solo right. I'm going to do it again, because they say, oh, do me a favour. I paid $20 to come in here. I don't want to kill all this old rubbish. So, so you are on the spot, which is good for you. It's good to be on the spot. It's good to have that tension and that stress. To go that extra step or that extra yard, you need that. Anyway, so here we go. SSRO bombs a bit. Norman sticks his neck out and goes to the people at EMI who say, oh, no, we're not going to do any more with those guys. They don't sell. Well, Norman says, well, okay, but you didn't give them a really good shot. You didn't really promote it. Let me have them in to do another album, because I think they're great. So Norman sticks his neck out. So back in we go with Parachute. Wally and Phil were under pressure to write it, and so they wrote the entire thing together in a flat in North London, and they came to us in the studio once again with the bones of it, and then with Norman and the rest of us, we put it together. The nice thing with Parachute is the fact that Wally and I get to sing a few more lead parts, which was due to the fact that Norman wanted to, the generosity of Phil and the generosity of Norman saying, yeah, I think it would put a different kind of tilt on the whole song if you split the vocals up a bit, have Wally doing that bit, Phil doing this bit, or Wally doing that bit, and John doing that bit, whatever. But the beautiful thing about Phil, Wally and I is that as soon as we started singing together, a bit like the Eagles in many ways, with their harmony, the way they approach their harmonies, that we just blended really well. I mean, Wally's got a very deep kind of gravelly voice. Phil's got a lead vocal voice.
Wally's on Sickle Clowns, right?
Yeah, I've got this kind of high voice, which can be helped with a drumstick placed in the right position. So I can reach higher notes even sometimes, but the three of us kind of blended together, and Norman recognised that in SSRO, and of course when we came to Parachute, it was pushed forward, so it was even more harmonising, more harmonies in that. Dick Taylor had left the band in the meantime. He'd gone off to get married. He didn't want to play disappointed with what had gone on, I think. And so we got this guy in from a band called Edgar Broughton. And Edgar Broughton was a sort of Midlands-based band. They were a very good blues band. Got this young guy in called Vic Unit, and he played guitar on Parachute.
Oh wow!
And that's how it got. It got very good this time round. It got very, very good press. I mean, the press loved Parachute. It got voted Rolling Stone Record of the Year in the US, as in 1970, I think it was, Rolling Stone Record of the Year. But once again, some kind of, I don't think Aleister Crowley was responsible for this. I didn't even know about him, but there was a black cloud over the pretty thing. It couldn't kind of get any sunshine through in terms of making any money. I mean, but we never really went about money. I mean, we were just about creating and about listening to ourselves making good music. And if we liked it, we were the judge and jury of what we were doing. And Norman.
I like that.
So there we are.
I've always liked bands that focused more on the music and enjoyed doing what they were doing with their music, and it shows. You could feel it in the music too, the heart and the passion within it.
I mean, we got some money we got an advance from EMI, but we bought all our backline with it and everything. We weren't sort of sitting around putting petrol in our Rolls Royces, because it wasn't like that. We weren't in Rolls Royces, anything like that at all. But we were out there working, and we liked each other's company, and we were young guys who were we were doing what we wanted to do really, and we were getting paid something. And so we didn't, we were very fortunate. We didn't have managers and breathing down our necks at that moment. So, oh no, you got to bring out a single and all that.
Yeah.
Saying that, Norman said, well, look, let's put a couple of singles out. At that time, Vic had decided that Skip and Vic didn't get on so great. I mean, when we did some live gigs, sometimes Skip would chase Vic round the stage, trying to decapitate him with a cymbal or something. Yeah. So it wasn't that good. So Vic, who's a very gentle guy, a nice player, decided he had enough. So he was off. And so we got a very young Peter Tolson, who was working with a band called Heir Apparent, Irish band, very good band, blues band. And he joined. And so we made a couple of singles that Norman wanted to put a couple of singles out in addition to the album, just to see if we could get some airplay, get some sales for EMI, etc. And so we brought a couple of singles out. So the very first time we were in a studio, we hadn't heard Pete Tolson play very much. He came along, we did a few numbers and we liked him. He's only 19 at the time, coming up for 20. And we did a single called October the 26th, which was the date of the Russian Revolution. And we were all standing in the studio. We'd done the backing track. Wally had put down the vocal. Norman and I and Phil, Wally, we'd done it and sung all the harmonies. Sounded pretty good. Norman had added some harpsichord to it. It was sounding, whoa, this is sounding pretty full. So we needed the guitar. We needed some guitar fills and guitar solo. So we said, okay, Pete. So he said, all right, yeah. So off we went outside. We're all standing in the box and rolled the tapes, the old 2-inch studio tapes in those days. And he played solo. And we all fell on the floor with our mouths open. We went, my God, this is amazing. And Norman said, he's a bit good, isn't he? We all nearly died on the floor on the spot. When this guy came out with this album, you listen to that single. I think it's some bonus tracks on one of the reissues or something. But if you get a chance to listen to October the 26th, just listen to the guitar solo and the end.
Oh, it's a fantastic song, yeah.
It sounds like a violin, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It's crazy.
The intervals this guy gets, and all out of a little old guitar. It's just extraordinary.
If I'm not mistaken,
So
I think
he
it's
was.
on the Psychedelic Years 2 CD set that you guys had out,
It
the
might well
reissued
be.
ones.
I don't
Yeah,
know, but
there's so much
I know
stuff.
it. Yeah. Well, So he was in, and
Oh, that's cool.
we had a long, relationship with him. We gigged and we did a lot of stuff, and he was, he was the sort of guitar. He would sound like two guitar players playing. I mean, if you watch some of the Paris stuff that we did Rain, in the Square, Rain, that trilogy from Parachute. We did that live on French TV. This is a crappy sound and crappy camera work, really. But if you watch Tolson, I mean, he's got a cigarette stuck in the end of his guitar, and he's just not even looking, and he's just playing the rhythm part and the solo part all together at the same time. It's just remarkable what he could do, that guy.
I'll have to see that. The only guitarist I know with the cigarette at his end was Frank Zappa, but I have to see the Tolson doing that too.
I like Frank. He wanted to. He At some point we talked to Frank, funny enough, and his manager. He wanted to manage the Pretty Things
Oh,
at
really?
one point.
Wow.
Yeah, years and years and years later. But we met in London. We had a couple of meetings with him. Didn't work out for some reason, but I liked Frank. I think he was very cool. I liked him a lot. He pushed the boundaries, moved the envelopes around.
Yeah, when I first heard Frank, I was like, oh, wow, this is what music could be. Like, this is so different than the usual that I was listening to at the time, which was like the Beatles and, the good stuff. And the Beatles pushed boundaries beyond belief, too. And it's like, wow, you learn so much. And then now you hear a lot of bands that try to push, and there's just not much to push now. It's just reusing. But there's a lot of good bands now, too. You just have to look. And it's like, wow, I discover some new music here and there, and it's incredible talent.
I mean, there is, but I mean, what I find about it, I'm old school anyway. I mean, I'm old school. But some guy sent me a video and a song the other day to listen to on YouTube. I listened to it. Oh, it's pretty good playing, good drummer, good guitarist, but it lacked any kind of dynamics. It was like we start off at one level and we don't change. You couldn't tell the difference between the chorus and the verses. And I said to him, well, to be honest with you, I don't think you've been given enough lead vocal on it, because you can't really hear I don't know what the song's about. And I'm listening to it on headphones and I can't even make out the lyrics. And I'm saying to him, well, look, if you want to sell this stuff, you've got to make the song about something. It's got to mean something to somebody. It's no good just doing a great kind of, virtual performance of, drummer smashing it all over the place and the lead guitarist doing a really great riff. That's good, but you need also to have something. You need to say something
catchy, and also something to speak volumes too. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's, I mean, the difference between our generation and a lot of the other forthcoming, subsequent generations, were the songs were about something. They were about, about the government. They were about love, obviously about love. They were about drugs. They were about, and they were pretty upfront about it.
And they were sometimes even stories about those things, if not all,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I love that, and that's where I get my inspiration from. But I recently was talking with the producer here in Connecticut, where I'm from. His name's Frankie Vinci. He was in a band called Photomaker, and from the '70s with Wally Bryson and a few others. There, I'm trying to remember names on the top of my head. And he's a friend of mine. And he goes, to make your songs better, because he was giving me advice, he's like, you got to have what you just were stating, like that, where you have to have a change for the chorus. You have to have a change. So I started to really learn from that. But I've worked with Terry Draper of Klaatu, and even he was like, you got to work on the harmonies and getting those. So everybody has, I love how they have their own advice instead. So I love learning from others, and I think that's the biggest thing in the music industry, and that's why I do this podcast, is to hear stories and learn from other musicians that I look up to.
We're happy to talk about it. I mean, it was a very big time for all of us. I mean, we were only younger than you are now.
Wow.
So, I mean, we were very young guys and very just without anything to learn from. We didn't have anybody saying, well, I'm going to listen to Frank Zappa, because Frank Zappa wasn't even happening. But I mean, one of the things we learned was that we were in the studio doing SF Sorrow, and we were in studio 2 or 3, I can't remember which one it was now. There's 3 studios. The Beatles were in 1 at the time. I think Pink Floyd were in 3 and we were in 2, and George and Ringo used to pop along and have a listen to SF Sorrow, and we used to have a cup of tea together, all the rest of it. And in Studio 2, when the Beatles weren't recording one day, there's a little cupboard in the corner of Studio 2. We happened to open this cupboard, nosy little sods, so we opened this cupboard, and in there's Ringo's drum kit. And we noticed, because we're not stupid, that this drum kit is at least a third larger than any drum kit I've ever seen in my life. Really? The snare drum is a third larger and a third deeper. The bass drum is much, much bigger than a standard bass drum. So I think, well, that's how they got the sound. Wow. That's how they got that, sound out of this drum kit, because it's bigger. So we nicked don't tell Ringo whatever you do, but we nicked, we stole his snare drum on one of our tracks to play it.
Well, I don't have connections, so you're good.
Oh, thank God. Sorry, Ringo, but thanks, Ringo. Yeah. I owe you, baby.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So the Pretty Things is now happening with a reimagined version of Parachute coming out in October.
Yeah, I mean, we've been through lots of different kind of band changes and left the band and came back and did a lot of live work and all that sort of thing over the years. 10 years, Wally and I weren't playing live at all. Phil was working with a live band, I think. We kind of fallen out. There was an album called Balboa Island. Mm-hmm. And Mark St. John, who's a great guy for organising stuff. I mean, great organiser, got us all the catalogues sorted out, remastered and reappeared, and he saved the band from a lot of heartache, really. But he wanted to do some production. He wanted to be the producer. So we went to do this album called Balboa Island, and we had a bit of an altercation with Skip and Mark about the drum kit that Mark wanted Skip to play. Skip didn't want to play on it, and it was all getting a little bit difficult and hard to work this. Anyway, so we subsequently found out a couple of months later that the band, that was Phil, Dick and Frank and a couple of other guys, and Mark on drums, were finishing this album off. So we kind of, we were out. We didn't really want to go through all that again. Now, I was living in Spain. It was difficult for me to commit 100% to working live with the Pretty Things through lots of other reasons. So Wally and I weren't doing anything. So Wally and I were doing some writing down at Wally's house in Sussex, in the UK. And the phone rings. We're having a cup of tea and a sandwich for lunch. And the phone rings. And so, hello, mate, it's Pete here. So he said, Pete? Yeah, Pete, because we haven't heard from Pete for donkey's years. So it's Pete Tolson. Oh, hi, Pete. How you doing, mate? Yeah. Listen, he said, I've had my guitar underneath my bed for the last 15 years. He said, I decided to put it back together again, put the neck back on it and string it up, and I'd like to play some more music. So I mean, it was a big silence our end, because we were actually gobsmacked, because I mean, he just he buggered off again. I mean, it was the Pretty Things are a band like that. It's a very emotional. When you're playing in the Pretty Things, you're playing with 4 or 5 other emotional fruitcakes, basically. and of course, the emotions run high. The music means something. The creativity means something. So he was off. So we didn't see hide nor hair of him. He just disappeared. We would try to find him. We couldn't find him. There were drink and drugs involved. So Frank came in. Frank was a friend of Mark's, came in and played for us and saved our bacon on many occasions. So that was good. So Wally thought to himself, well, why don't we, as we've got Pete back in again, why don't we get together with Skip, give Skip a call, and then why don't we have a crack at, because Parachute's coming up for 40 years anniversary, why don't we try and record it? So we said back to Pete, we rang him up and said, come on, Pete, what do you think about Parachute? He said, great, yeah, that'd be good. So he said, I can't travel that much because I don't have a license to drive. He said, so perhaps you guys come up to where I live, which was Harlow in Essex, and I'll arrange the studio to rehearse, and we'll go in there and see what noise we can make. So we went in there, had a crack around, came out stone deaf for about 3 days, and decided that we'd have a go. I came back to Spain, and I have a friend here who's a very good sound engineer, who was a front of house engineer as well. And I went to see him in Malaga and said, "Look, Woody, how about you coming in with us? We haven't got any money. We can't afford to book your studio, but what we can do is give you a percentage of the album. So we'll just split it 5 ways. There's the four of us and you." So he said, "Okay, all right, we'll do that." So we got them back and we started to record it here in Malaga, in a small studio in North Malaga, nice and grotty, and paint peeling off the walls and all that. It was very nice. Good area for Parachute. And we worked through it. We then, having finished it, I wrote a song and Wally wrote an extra song as a couple of bonus tracks. Pete wrote a song but wasn't very happy about it. So we didn't include it on the original release, which only came out as a CD in the UK on a company called Cherry Red Records. Nothing was really done very much with it at that time. Once again, another kind of Pretty Things album historical moment where great album, lots of really good playing on it, lots of great singing on it, although Phil couldn't sing on it because he was, tied up with his live band and didn't want to have lots of Pretty Things in his life. So he was happy to carry on with Dick because they go back to the originals, and I can understand that. So Phil wrote some extra verses for some of the songs because we extended some of them. And then we recorded it and made it. Wally mixed the whole thing. And then we brought it out on Cherry Red as a CD. It didn't really sell. And so we left it for the contract to expire with Cherry Red, which it did. And then we thought about leaving it for a little while. And then we'd like to go back and sort of revisit it, which is what we did. So Pete Tolson in the meantime sadly had died. And so we then took his track and basically finished it off. And so now the first time this new Parachute record has come out as a vinyl. So it's a double vinyl. We've redone the artwork completely and we've remixed it. So making it sound more analog than digital. We made it sound softer, warmer. And it's not, we haven't nicked any backing tracks from the original. We've completely re-recorded the whole thing. So it's a labour of love. I doubt very much, but it will sell millions, and I don't really care. In a way, it's a way of kind of squaring a circle, if that's the right terminology.
I'll be definitely ordering my copy. I got it bookmarked on my computer. I'm just waiting until I get my paycheck. I'll be definitely ordering.
Yeah, it's a really nice record, and there's some very nice moments on it. And Tolson's guitar work, where he never played on the original, he's done some fabulous guitar on it. I mean, awesome. If you Christ and the Midnight Circus, you've got Grass, you've got some amazing guitar parts. Sickle Clowns, guitar work with Sickle Clowns. It's just stop it, stop it immediately. I can't stand it anymore. It's just wonderful.
I'm excited for this project, and I want to thank you for coming on the Unlikely Places Pop and Rock radio show. And hopefully, if I get the album, I'll see if I can get some way to digitalize it so I can play it on the radio show for you guys as well.
Yeah, we've got some other things going. I've got a new album and an autobiography coming out next year. That's my 80th.
When those
birthday.
come out, you're welcome to come back on and talk about those ones.
Yeah, I'll come back.
I'd love to
come back on. And we'll have a lovely chat about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And why I've done it and this book and everything else.
Yeah, we can just focus right on that the whole show. That'd be perfect.
Yeah, it'd be lovely. Thanks, Jeremy. You're a star.
No problem.